What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the BLU Bold N2 and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. Now before we go any further, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the BLU Bold N2, we're getting a 6.6-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 390, an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9, and a 90.9% screen to body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED Plus display with a 1080p resolution as well, a PPI of 392, and an aspect ratio of 20 by 9. So both phones, for what they are, do have really good displays here, and if you're looking for something for content consumption, you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. But that being said, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have a couple advantages. First of all, at 6.7 inches versus 6.6 inches, it is a little bit larger, not really by a whole lot, but if you do want the largest display between the two, which I know a lot of you probably do, then the A73 5G will have a bit of an advantage. Another thing to keep in mind is that with an aspect ratio of 20 by 9 versus 19.5 by 9, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor, and while in this case it's not really a huge difference, having a taller and more narrow form factor is going to give you a more immersive experience when you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, and if you're doing something like reading or scrolling through social media, with the A73 5G, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Again, in this situation, it's not really a huge difference, but if you do want the best experience when you're consuming content, then it is still something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind here is the display quality. While both phones do have really good looking images with great colors, really good brightness, and 1080p resolutions, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G with the Super AMOLED Plus display versus a regular AMOLED display is going to be a little bit better overall. And with the 120Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. Now you probably can't even tell in this video, but when you're actually using the phones, if you're doing something like watching a video, playing a game, or really anything with a lot of motion on the screen, it will be a little bit faster and smoother and just more fluid overall with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. And in addition to this, when you're just using the phone in general, it will feel a little bit more premium. But again, overall, although the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have a slightly better display, you're really not going to go wrong with the BLU Bold N2 either. Now for storage, the BLU Bold N2 is getting 256GB of internal storage with no microSD card expansion, and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is getting 128GB, and this phone does have microSD card expansion. And keep in mind, there is another variant of this phone that has 256 as well. Now in this case, I really don't feel like there's a huge difference as far as storage goes, because each phone does have its own advantages. On one hand, the BLU Bold N2 does have a lot of internal storage, but the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, or at least this version of the phone in my hand, while having less internal storage, does have microSD card expansion, but at the same time, you do need a pretty big microSD card to catch up to the BLU Bold N2 as far as storage goes, unless of course you get the other variant of this phone that has 256GB too, in which case, if both phones have 256GB, the microSD card expansion would give the A73 5G an edge in that situation. But that being said, you kind of have to think about how much storage you actually need, because for the average user, I feel like even 128GB is going to be perfectly fine, and with the BLU Bold N2, 256GB, even with no microSD card expansion, is probably going to be more than you need. So in general, it's really up to personal preference. If you want microSD card expansion, then of course the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage, but otherwise overall, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone as far as storage goes. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have in-display fingerprint scanners as well, so definitely a nice touch. But starting with the BLU Bold N2, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And moving on to the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones also have Face Unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the BLU Bold N2, we got a 16 megapixel front facing camera. Then on the back, we got a full quad camera setup with the 64 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 2K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we got a 32 megapixel front facing camera. Then on the back, we got another quad camera setup with a 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. And for video, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G can record in 4K in both the rear and front cameras. So in general, as far as features go, both phones have pretty much everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, you're not going to go wrong with either phone. But that being said, when it comes to quality, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to have a huge advantage here. It's really just on a whole different level. So if you are taking a lot of photos or recording a lot of videos, because again, remember, this phone can record in 4K, whereas the BLU Bold N2 can only record in 2K, you are most likely going to be better off with the A73 5G. But on the other hand, if you just want to take the occasional nice photo here and there, and you want everything to look good, but you don't really need the top of the line quality, then the BLU Bold N2 will still be okay. But again, if you want the best camera quality and features between the two, then by far, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have a huge advantage. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, with the BLU Bold N2, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810 processor. And with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM as well with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G processor. Now, I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, and here are the scores right here. As you can see, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to have a significant advantage here. So if you are doing more high performance activities like mobile gaming, for example, or you're just going to be on your phone a lot, then you will get a much better experience with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. But that being said, the BLU Bold N2, while really not being nearly as fast as the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, is still not really a slow phone. It's really just your typical mid-range phone, whereas with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, while not exactly being a flagship phone, it's definitely not going to be as fast as an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra or anything, but it is actually pretty close to those entry-level flagship phones like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the Google Pixel 6a and stuff like that. And while not being quite at that level, it is definitely a viable option if you want that kind of performance, but you don't want to spend that kind of money. So in general, if you are going to be on your phone a lot and you do want higher performance, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to be the way to go here. But if you're not really going to be on your phone all the time and you're doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, and stuff like that, the BLU Bold N2, again, while obviously not being as fast as the A73 5G, is still going to be perfectly fine. And in case you're wondering, the BLU Bold N2 is in fact a 5G phone as well. So if you just want 5G connectivity, either phone will be perfectly fine. Now for the batteries, the BLU Bold N2 has a 4200 mAh battery that supports 30-watt fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25-watt fast charging. So in general, the A73 5G is definitely going to have an advantage as far as the battery goes. Sure, the BLU Bold N2 does have slightly better fast charging, but in my experience, it's not really noticeable. With a good fast charger, the charging speeds with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G are really just as fast, and at the same time, this phone does have a significantly larger battery, and while for some reason the battery life on this phone isn't quite as good as you might expect with a 5000 mAh battery, it still is better than the BLU Bold N2. So if having a good battery is a high priority for you, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage. Another thing to keep in mind here is that with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we are getting NFC, whereas the BLU Bold N2 for whatever reason doesn't have NFC. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will be a better choice. Another weird, annoying quirk with both of these phones is that neither of them has a headphone jack. So if you have a pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, unfortunately with both of these phones, you will need an adapter. But that being said, with the BLU Bold N2, you actually get an adapter plus a pair of USB-C headphones in the box. So if being able to use normal headphones is a priority for you, which I feel like it's probably not going to be for most people, it seems like kind of a little thing, but if it is, if you really want a headphone jack, then again, while unfortunately neither phone has one, at least with the BLU Bold N2, you will have an adapter without having to buy one. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, I feel like the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is honestly a better device in pretty much every way. Sure, when it comes to certain areas like the display for example, they are really close. If you are consuming a lot of content and really not doing a whole lot else, you really won't go wrong with either phone. The storage is also pretty close because on one hand, while the BLU Bold N2 does have a lot more internal storage, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have a 256GB variant as well, and it does have microSD card expansion. But again, honestly, for the average user, no matter which of these phones you get, you're most likely going to have more storage than you need anyway. For the camera setup, again, both phones have pretty much all the features, but the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has much better photo quality and it can record in 4K, whereas again, the BLU Bold N2 maxes out at 2K, which is a resolution I feel like not a whole lot of people use. As far as performance goes, the A73 5G is clearly better. It also has a larger battery and NFC as well. But that being said, with the BLU Bold N2, again, the performance really isn't bad on this phone, and if you're just using it for basic activities, it still will get the job done, and the battery life, while not being as good good as the A73 5G, it's still not terrible. So in general, if you're not really using your phone a whole lot and you just need something for more basic activities, but you still want stuff like a good display, a solid camera, and decent performance, the BLU Bold N2, again, while not being quite as good as the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G in pretty much any way, is still going to be a perfectly acceptable option. And keep in mind, although the A73 5G again is significantly better, it is also around double the price. So while this phone does have better performance and more features, you also will have to pay a little bit more for it. But that being said, of course, if the price difference doesn't really matter to you, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is definitely a better choice overall. But this concludes my comparison between the BLU Bold N2 and the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.